You know, there are some days in life that just feel ordinary at first, the kind you don't expect to remember. But then something happens that changes everything, and suddenly, the ordinary turns into the unforgettable. That weekend in Montana was supposed to be just another hiking trip for 12-year-old Ethan, a kid who thought he knew everything about the wilderness because he watched too many survival videos and wore his scout uniform like a badge of invincibility. And Coda, his Akita, well, Coda was the kind of dog you notice immediately, the kind that looks calm and collected, all fluffy fur and serious eyes, but with a quiet sense of strength you only realize is there when it matters most. I remember the first moment that stick in my memory. Ethan had wandered off the trail to inspect some weird, twisted tree roots sticking out of the earth like veins. Most kids would be told to leave it alone, but not him. And Coda, of course, followed like he always did, padding silently behind, tongue lolling but eyes sharp, ears twitching at every sound. The Bob Marshall Wilderness looks innocent from the edge of a parking lot. You see tall pines, soft sunlight filtering through branches, maybe a creek glimmering in the distance, and you think, yeah, I could hike there for hours. But step onto the trail and suddenly it's a whole other planet. Rocky slopes, uneven terrain, shadows that move in ways that make your skin crawl. It's the kind of place where animals rule and humans are, well, guests at best. By late morning, the group had already hiked a few miles. Ethan, curious as ever, lagged behind to explore, and before anyone noticed, he had vanished from the main trail. It wasn't like he meant to get lost, not exactly, but in that vast forest, a kid can disappear in a heartbeat. And that's when Coda's instincts kicked in. He paused for a moment, head tilting, nose twitching, eyes scanning the brush. Something was off. There's this thing about dogs, they sense things before we do. Danger, uncertainty, fear. Coda could feel it all, and he wasn't about to let his boy get swallowed up by the wilderness. At first, Coda tried to stay with the group, letting the scouts' chatter and laughter mask the anxiety in the air, but then he saw Ethan, small and alone, barely holding his backpack strap, staring at some fallen log like it might swallow him whole. That's when Coda took off, moving faster than I ever imagined an Akita could, weaving through underbrush, leaping over rocks, tail stiff but calm, leading Ethan back towards safer ground, or at least the closest thing to it in a wild forest. The first night was, well, it was a test. The temperature dropped faster than anyone expected in mid-September, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. Ethan huddled under a tarp the troop had left behind, shivering, teeth chattering, while Coda curled around him like a furry shield. Every time Ethan tried to get up and wander, Coda would gently push him back, growling softly, eyes sharp, as if saying, sit, stay, we'll figure this out together. And the forest at night, it's not like any forest you see in pictures. It's alive with sound. The rustling of leaves, the snap of branches, distant howls of coyotes, and something bigger, heavier moving in the shadows. Ethan's imagination ran wild, and I'm not going to lie, mine would have too if I'd been there. Somewhere out there, not too far, were grizzly bears, the kind that make grown adults freeze in fear. And yet, here was Coda, calm as ever, facing the darkness with this quiet confidence that made Ethan feel just a little safer. By the second day, hunger and fatigue had started to creep in. Ethan's stomach growled so loud that I'm sure even the squirrels in the trees knew it was time to eat. There wasn't much to forage, just a few wild berries, some creek water, and Coda's steady presence, reminding him to stay put and conserve energy. And that's when the real bond between them showed. Ethan had always loved Coda, sure, but this was different. The boy whispered to him in the quiet moments, apologizing for getting lost, asking the dog if he was tired, if he hated him for dragging him into this mess, and Coda would just nuzzle him, lick his hand, and lie down again, eyes alert, ears perked, ready for anything. It was like watching a miniature guardian angel, furry and four-legged. Then came the first real scare. A large shadow moved across the clearing where they had camped, a low growl rumbling through the air that made Ethan freeze mid-breath. Coda's hackles rose, his body tensing like a spring, but he didn't panic. Instead, he placed himself between Ethan and the sound, growling softly, eyes locked on the movement. Ethan wanted to scream, wanted to run, but he trusted Coda instinctively. The shadows shifted closer, too close to ignore, and then Coda stepped forward, chest out, tail high, teeth bared not aggressively, but in warning. The creature, a massive grizzly, paused, sniffed the air, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the bear, uncertain, moved along the edge of the clearing, choosing the path of least resistance. Ethan let out a shaky breath, Coda still standing firm beside him. And that's when he realized something. This dog wasn't just a pet. He was a protector, a warrior, someone who would put himself in danger without a second thought to keep Ethan alive. As the sun rose on day 3, the forest seemed to mock them with its beauty. Golden beams filtering through leaves, birds singing as if nothing had happened, and Ethan, exhausted, still clinging to Coda for every ounce of courage he could muster. They had survived 2 nights, faced the unknown, and somehow they were still together. And in those quiet, tense moments, Ethan began to understand a truth most people only learn much later in life. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the soft nudge of a loyal friend, the quiet presence of someone who refuses to leave your side, the kind of heroism that doesn't get medals but changes a life forever. I could keep going about the creek they followed, the small makeshift shelters Coda helped him find, and the way the dog kept Ethan motivated, but it all comes down to this. The first part of their ordeal wasn't about fighting bears or crossing cliffs. It was about trust, instinct, and the first flicker of heroism that would grow into something extraordinary. And as Ethan drifted off to sleep that night, head on Coda's thick fur, he wasn't just a lost boy anymore. He was a boy with a guardian, a partner, a friend who would face anything alongside him. The forest was dangerous, the night long, and the threats real, but for the first time since he wandered off the trail, Ethan felt a sliver of hope, because he knew Coda would not fail him. Not now, not ever. By the morning of the 3rd day, the forest seemed almost alive in a way that made your skin crawl. Every rustle of leaves, every distant crack of a branch sounded like a warning, and Ethan, already weary, was starting to understand just how serious this situation had become. Coda, however, seemed completely unfazed. The dog had somehow found a rhythm, patting ahead slightly to check the path, then circling back to nudge Ethan forward when the boy lagged. "Come on, buddy," Ethan whispered one time, voice rough from the cold and exhaustion. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." Coda responded with a low, almost amused growl and nudged him again, a way of saying, "Yes, you can, now get moving." It was amazing, really, the way a dog could communicate without words, and Ethan had learned to trust every little twitch, tilt of the head, or flick of the tail. That day, the forest was quiet but deceptive, hiding dangers that no kid, or most adults, could anticipate. They had to cross a small creek, the water icy and swift. Ethan slipped once, nearly toppling into the current, and Coda lunged, grabbing the strap of his backpack with his teeth and pulling him back onto firmer ground. The kid let out a gasp, part panic, part relief, and Coda just gave a satisfied shake, like he'd handled it flawlessly, as if to remind Ethan, "I've got this." It was during a short break on a rocky incline that Ethan first saw it. Massive paw prints in the mud, fresh, unmistakable, and terrifying. Grizzly prints, enormous, each one the size of Ethan's hand and darker than anything he had ever imagined. His stomach flipped, and he froze, heart hammering in his chest. Coda stiffened instantly, ears up, hackles raised. The dog didn't bark yet, but his entire posture screamed warning. Ethan could feel the weight of the danger before he even saw the bear, and for a moment, he panicked, wanting to run, wanting to get back to the trail, but Coda stood firm. Slowly, Ethan realized that the dog wasn't just alert. He was strategizing, positioning himself between the boy and the direction the tracks led. For the next few hours, they moved cautiously, Coda scouting the area with his nose to the ground and eyes scanning. Ethan following close behind, learning to mimic his movements, learning to move silently through the forest. They had to cross a narrow ridge, the kind where one misstep meant a tumble down into rocky terrain. Ethan's legs trembled, and he looked down to see the dizzying drop below. "Okay, Coda," he muttered, voice small. I think I can do this." Coda gave a short bark, more like an encouragement than a warning, and waited for Ethan to take the first step. Step by step, inch by inch, They made it across, Kota occasionally checking behind to make sure no unseen danger was following. And there it was, the moment they had both been dreading. From the shadows of a small grove, a massive grizzly appeared, moving with terrifying calm, its eyes locked on the pair. Ethan froze, terror paralyzing him, but Kota stepped forward, chest puffed out, teeth bared, not in mindless aggression, but in a calculated, protective stance. Ethan whispered, "Kota, no," but the dog ignored him. He wasn't about to let Ethan face this alone. The bear growled, low and menacing, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, as the grizzly charged, Kota lunged sideways, barking, snapping, doing everything he could to distract the bear. Ethan ducked behind a fallen tree, heart racing, watching his dog's bravery unfold in front of him. Kota moved like a living shield, darting in unpredictable angles, buying time, keeping the bear from Ethan. It was chaotic, terrifying, yet somehow mesmerizing. Every movement was precise, almost like he'd been trained for this his whole life, but it was instinct and loyalty that guided him. The grizzly swiped once, hitting Kota, and the boy's stomach lurched. But Kota shook it off, growled even louder, and pressed on, never taking his eyes off Ethan. Eventually, the bear, frustrated and perhaps surprised by the dog's courage, retreated into the trees, leaving both Kota and Ethan shaken but alive. Ethan ran to his dog, hugging him so tight he could barely breathe, whispering, "You're my hero, Kota. My hero." The dog licked his face, as if to say, "I told you, I've got this." That night, they found a small, sheltered hollow beneath an old pine, enough to protect them from the wind and rain that had started. Ethan tried to eat a few remaining berries, but his appetite was gone. Kota curled around him, a furry fortress, keeping the boy warm and safe. And as Ethan drifted into a fitful sleep, he realized the bond between them had transformed. Kota wasn't just a pet anymore. He was a lifeline, a guardian, and a friend who would put himself in harm's way without hesitation. The fourth day brought a new set of challenges. The creek they had followed had risen overnight, turning into a fast, churning current. Ethan looked at it and groaned. "There's no way I can cross that," he said. Kota, of course, thought otherwise. He carefully tested the waters, found a series of rocks that could serve as stepping stones, and barked at Ethan, urging him to trust him. Inch by inch, with Kota guiding each step and nudging him when he faltered, Ethan made it across without falling in. It was exhausting, terrifying, and yet exhilarating. The kind of moment where you realize just how capable you can be when you're not alone. Later that morning, they stumbled into a small clearing, and Ethan spotted a glint of color in the distance. A group of scouts searching the trail, shouting his name. His heart leapt, and he ran, tripping over roots but refusing to stop. Kota followed, staying alert, ears twitching at every sound. As they reached the group, the scout leader scooped Ethan into his arms, shouting in relief, and the parents who had arrived minutes later practically collapsed in gratitude, hugging both Ethan and Kota. The boy kept hugging his dog, tears running down his cheeks. "He saved me." Ethan sobbed, voice muffled against Kota's thick fur. "He saved me." Kota, oblivious to the emotional chaos, wagged his tail, tongue lolling, as if the whole ordeal had been just another day of adventure. Over the next few hours, the rescuers pieced together their story, the narrow ridge, the rising creek, the grisly encounter, and every time someone looked at Kota, eyes wide in disbelief, the dog simply sat there, calm, proud, unassuming. No one could quite believe that such a large, fluffy Akita had stood his ground against a grizzly, navigated the wilderness, and kept a terrified 12-year-old alive for 4 days. And through it all, Ethan never left Kota's side. Every step they took back to civilization was a quiet celebration of trust, courage, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't need words. People kept asking, "How did you do it?" And the boy would just smile, scratching behind Kota's ears. "He's my dog," he'd say, "and he's brave." Kota's eyes seemed to sparkle with satisfaction, like he knew exactly how much he had impressed everyone, even if he was mostly concerned about finding a snack or stretching his legs. But beneath the surface, what everyone saw was more than bravery. It was partnership, instinct, and an unbreakable bond forged in the face of real danger. That night, as Ethan finally slept in a proper bed, Koda curled up beside him, and you could almost feel the weight of everything that had happened settle in. The forest, the bear, the cold, the hunger, all of it had tested them, stretched their courage, and left them with a story that no one would ever forget. And yet, even with the danger behind them, the memory of Koda standing firm against the grizzly, the way he had nudged Ethan to keep moving, to trust, to survive, would stay with the boy forever. It was one thing to read about loyalty in a book or watch heroism on a screen, and an entirely different thing to experience it firsthand, to feel it in the heartbeat of a dog who refused to abandon you when the world was at its most threatening. By the time the sun set, Ethan's parents had promised him that Koda would get as many treats as he wanted, new toys, and all the love he could handle. But for Ethan, the reward was simple, knowing he was alive because of someone else, someone who didn't think twice, someone who simply acted out of instinct and love. And in those moments, quiet and still, Ethan realized something profound. Bravery isn't always loud. Heroism doesn't always come with a medal. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a warm, furry body, standing between you and danger, refusing to move, refusing to give up, refusing to let anything happen to you. That was Koda. That was the heart of the story. That was the kind of courage that sticks with you forever. By the time they got back to the edge of the forest, sunlight was dipping low, painting the trees in gold and orange. And for the first time in 4 days, Ethan felt safe. Really safe. Not the kind of, I think I'm okay, safe he'd felt wandering alone. Not the jittery, what's that noise? Safe of the past nights. But the kind of comfort that comes when you know you've made it, when the danger is behind you, and the person, or in this case, dog, who got you through it is right there beside you. People were everywhere. Rescuers, scouts, parents, volunteers. And yet, all Ethan wanted to do was kneel down, hug Koda, and let the dog know just how grateful he was. Koda, as if fully aware of his hero status, sat there calmly, chest heaving, tongue lolling, eyes alert, occasionally glancing at the crowd like, yes, yes, thank you all, but can we skip the fuss and maybe get a snack? There was laughter, tears, cheers, and the kind of relief you only see when someone, or something, has survived the impossible. The rescuers kept asking questions, taking notes, trying to piece together the timeline. The bear encounter, the creek crossings, the nights spent under the stars. And every single person who heard the story froze at the part where Koda had stood his ground against a grizzly. One scout volunteer leaned close and said, I've never seen anything like it. That dog, he's a legend. Ethan just smiled, hugging Koda even tighter. I told you he was brave, he whispered, voice thick. He didn't let anything happen to me. Koda seemed to puff up at that, tail wagging lazily, giving the tiniest bark of agreement, almost proud of himself for a job well done. But beneath the relief and laughter, there was this deeper, quieter moment. Ethan's parents, still shaken, knelt beside him and Koda, tears in their eyes, whispering thanks over and over, pressing kisses to Ethan's hair and rubbing Koda's thick coat. It wasn't just gratitude, it was awe. Because the truth was clear. Koda had done something extraordinary, something beyond instinct. He had faced fear, assessed danger, and protected the one he loved with every ounce of himself. Over the next few days, word spread through the small Montana community. Local papers picked it up, neighbors came to meet the brave dog, and Ethan's story was shared among scouts and parents like a legend in the making. But for Ethan, the story was simple. It wasn't about the newspaper articles or the applause. It was about looking down at Koda every morning, knowing that dog would always be there, ready to protect him, ready to face whatever came next. And for Koda, the reward was just as simple. More scratches behind the ears, more walks, maybe a sneaky bite of bacon when no one was looking, and the satisfaction of a job done. The kind of satisfaction that doesn't need words. That week, Ethan spent a lot of time just sitting with Koda, watching him nap, brushing his fur, talking to him quietly. He thought about the creek, the ridge, the bear, and the long, cold nights, and realized something profound. Bravery isn't measured in medals or trophies. It's measured in loyalty, in actions, in the courage to do the right thing when the stakes are highest. And Koda, in his quiet, steady way, had shown that to him in the most real, unforgettable way possible. There were moments when Ethan laughed, remembering how Koda had scolded him for wandering off, nudged him back onto the trail, or given him that really kid look when he tried to complain about the cold. And there were moments when he cried, thinking about the fear he had felt and how it had all been tempered by Koda's presence. The forest had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been a place where their bond was forged, stronger than any force in the world. In the days and weeks that followed, Ethan kept telling the story, not because he wanted attention, but because he needed people to understand what loyalty, love, and courage looked like in real life. And Koda? Well, Koda went back to being a dog, chasing squirrels, lounging in the sun, demanding snacks at just the right moment, completely unbothered by the title of hero that humans had bestowed on him. But in Ethan's eyes, Koda wasn't just a pet anymore. He was family. He was a protector. He was the kind of friend who would stand between you and danger, no questions asked, heart and soul committed to keeping you alive. There's a lesson in that, I think, about trust, about friendship, about how courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a soft nudge, a warm presence, a heartbeat beside you in the dark. And sometimes it's a massive Akita standing tall against the impossible, refusing to back down until the person he loves is safe. People have asked Ethan, over and over, what he would have done without Koda. And he always answers the same way. I don't know. I really don't. He saved me. He saved me more times than I can count. And in that answer, there's everything you need to know about bravery, loyalty, and love. It's not about being the strongest. It's about being there, fully present, fully committed, willing to risk everything for someone else. That's heroism, plain and simple. And it's a kind of heroism you don't always get to see. Most of us read about it in books or watch it in movies, but rarely do we witness it in such a raw, real way. Ethan and Koda did. And that's why, even now, months later, when Ethan walks through the backyard and sees Koda lounging in the sun, he still remembers the forest, the bear, the creek, the cold, the nights of fear, and the small moments of courage that kept them alive. And he whispers, sometimes, just to himself, "You're the best. You're the bravest." Koda yawns, stretches, maybe looks at him like, "Thanks, kid." But really, it was nothing. And that's the beauty of it. True courage doesn't need recognition. True loyalty doesn't demand it. It just exists, quietly, powerfully, ready to face the impossible when it matters most. So here's my question to you. Watching this now, what would you do in a situation like that? Could you trust someone or something enough to let them protect you, even when everything around you is terrifying? Could you stand by someone, even when the odds are stacked against you? Think about that. And then think about Koda, a fluffy Akita, who faced a grizzly, crossed icy creeks, endured freezing nights, and never let go of the boy he loved. That's loyalty. That's courage. That's heroism. And it's a story worth remembering, worth sharing, worth feeling in your chest and letting it stay there. Because the next time someone tells you loyalty, bravery, or friendship is just a word, remember Ethan and Koda. Remember what it looks like when a dog refuses to quit, when a heart refuses to abandon, when courage is defined not by size or strength, but by love and commitment. And maybe, just maybe, you'll carry a little bit of that with you, too.